Hello and welcome to our next panel for Streaming Media West Connect. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the editor-in-chief and VP of Streaming Media and the conference chair for all of our streaming media conferences, both online and in person. I make no promises. I've learned my lesson. However, we are planning to be in Boston for Streaming Media East 2022, May 24th and 25th. Keep your eyes open for more information about that and one more Streaming Media Connect virtual event coming up in February. So if you're interested in speaking on either of those conferences, you can watch out for the call for speakers and submit your ideas for a topic, for a panel, for a presentation, whatever it is you might be interested in sharing with the streaming media audience. Before we jump into our conversation about how to optimize your live streaming workflow, just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you want to submit questions for our panelists, please do so in the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can put things in the chat. I can't guarantee we'll see them there, though. It's easier to keep track of them in the Q&A, so we request that's where you put them. Also, live transcripts are turned on. If you want to turn them off, go down to the bottom of your Zoom window, click on Live Transcript, click Disable Subtitles, and that should turn them off. Finally, just for being here, you're entered into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card, but there's a catch. You got to be here to win. We'll announce that winner at the end of the panel. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsors for Streaming Media West Connect, Video Guys, Conviva, Limelight Networks, and Signient. And we have video messages from each of them now. Bill, roll it.
Multiple camera angles to your production without adding operator. Perfect for houses of worship, corporate AV, education, and more. Video Guys offers cameras from PTZ Optics, Bird Dog, Panasonic, and NewTek. Control these cameras using an IR remote, control app, or hardware controller with serial or network connection.
Go to videoguys.com or call us at 800-323-2325 for help finding the camera that's right for you.
In this era of streaming video, we are pioneers, helping make your stories more vibrant. Conviva lives in billions of apps on devices all over the world, measuring trillions of data points each day to provide real-time insights for your content, ads, and social. Conviva. Every stream, every screen, every second.
So let's bring on our moderator, Shawn Lamb from Shawn Lamb Video and frequent streaming media producer contributor. Shawn, how are you?
Excellent today. Thank you very much, Eric.
I'll
really looking forward to the panel here. Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right.
If the rest of my panel could come on and join me, I think we can get going here. We've got a really big topic to cover today, and I think it's one that's very relevant and applicable in today's market, and it's how reliable is your live streaming production workflow, and how well is it adapted to today's fluid production scenario? So that's kind of the basic outline of what we're going to do. And I'm going to introduce our panelists here one by one and ask them to talk a little bit about themselves, and then we'll dive right in. So let's start with over on the island here, Salt Spring Island, Robert.
Hey there. Thanks for having me here, Shawn. Really great to be here with the company we have. I feel really privileged to be able to be in this industry, particularly particularly during this time. Generally speaking, I call myself a video solutions architect. There's not a piece of the streaming puzzle that I haven't touched over my career of 20 years plus, but I like to focus on the development end. I do a lot of streaming media server development, but a good part of my business pre-COVID and now coming back is live production, where I'm on site setting up gear, working with my clients to produce their live streams. And I think that's enough for now. I don't want to take up too much time on introductions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Corey.
I'm Corey Behnke, lead producer and co-founder at LiveX. We are in New York City and also Green Bay. We have a new remote broadcast facility in Green Bay. And we focus on live streaming for sports, news, major corporations, Fortune 100, Vox Media, produce New Year's Eve in Times Square, you name it, we've streamed it.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Corey. And Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Kethley. I'm with Pizzazz, and also LiveSports is my production company doing, well, LiveSports is what we do. And we have a leading edge, been doing video and streaming since it began. Been in the production business for 35 plus years now myself, and our company is based out of Texas, but we live most of our time now in the cloud. And that's where a big push of our production is through cloud workflows.
Excellent, thank you. Well, and I'm Shawn. My company is SLV Live, and I'm now celebrating 20 years in the business. We produce a lot of multi-camera live video switches that ultimately are webcast, and that's kind of our bread and butter. So, as of right now, we are still in business through this pandemic and actually prospering and thriving. This is going to be our most successful record-breaking year, and so we're busy, and like you guys are as well. So thank you very much in advance for your time and your contributions to this panel. Let's dive right in. So, there's two terms that I kind of want to start with, and one is fluid. So, the synopsis here is how well is our live streaming production workflows, are they adapted to today's fluid production scenarios? So fluid, how important is having fluid productions, and what is a fluid production? And the other term is optimizing. So how do we optimize our workflows so that they're best suited for live production? So let's go through the same order and get you guys to just start tackling those key terms, fluid and optimize. So Robert.
The first thing that came to mind when you said fluid is just when the production starts, everything is as everyone expects it to be. For me, I often tell my clients my number one job is managing expectations. As long as those are aligned on both sides of the table with my crew and the client's expectations, then things are going to be exactly as everyone wanted them to be. Sure, there's tech glitches that come up, but for me, fluid is basically that process of having everything in pre-production line up with where it's supposed to be during production. Optimize for me simply means that you don't have too much in the way or anything in the way of a workaround in place. A workaround is helpful when there's a problem that arises, because problems will come up. And for me, optimization is really, reducing those points of error and making sure that there's redundancy.
Take on these two terms.
So to kind of piggyback up on that, because I agree, fluid really does with live streaming. I like to tell people 99% of the people in our industry do film production or do television production, and then there's this small sliver of us that actually go live or live to tape. And to Robert's point is pre-production. What we've really learned is the more that we can get with the client early, have a coordinating producer, have somebody who's just with them nonstop and somewhat teaching them, right? There's some aspect, not everybody does live production like us all the time. So there's definitely this education with your client, because the more you can educate them, the more they can know what to expect. To Robert's point about managing expectations, it's almost like a lot of times they'll be like, oh, hey, you want a lower third here? And they'll be like, what's a lower third? And I know that sounds like baby, but, or a transition, or, helping them to elevate their show. To me, the pre-production, everything you do in live streaming is all about pre-production, because in a normal film, you've got all this time, or television show, you got all this time to edit it after, right? And so if you're trying to set up that assembly line live stream, you got to have the support and the fluid. The fluid comes when in with the changes and staying on top of those changes pre-production. Really, when you say the word fluid, really matters. And then optimization, yeah, redundancy 100%, but also, you know, optimization for me is efficiency. The more efficient you can make your set and you can make your plan of attack, the better. You know, there's this great thing. A lot of people might not have a vision, but they know what to exclude. And I always say, don't be afraid to know what you don't want, because that will inform where you're going to go. And that's the optimizing part, right? It's just removing and distilling down to what you actually need to do the live stream, because the more you can be efficient and optimize for what you actually need, the more you're going to spend on the things that, more time you're going to spend on the things that matter versus things that don't.
All right. Thanks, Corey. Jeff.
I guess for me, when you said fluid, I immediately thought the ability to make changes at the last minute, that fluid part, which I agree with completely with Corey and also with Robert, that in most of the situations we always run into, maybe my clients are special, but my clients actually have a lot of requests at the last minute. So maybe it's just my clients, but the fluidity of our production workflows, it comes down to that, so that whenever we do have an event going on and they say, oh, by the way, we need to go to Twitch. Oh yeah, the by the ways, right? Oh, by the way, we also need to go to YouTube. And oh yeah, by the way, we need to put this on a certain site server that's behind the corporate firewalls, all these kind of things. That fluidity that's where we have to be. In this business, we just have to be that way to be able to say yes, not always, oh, no, you can't do that, because no client ever wants to hear no. But maybe that's just my clients. But they tend to come up with these last minute, oh, by the ways. And that's our fluidity, is in our stance is we'll do our best. Let's check into it. Let's see how we can do that.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I don't think you're the only one that has clients like that. I know I definitely have experienced that. But when I think of fluidity, it definitely involves both that pre-production planning as well as once you're on site, right? In the pre-production phase, it's adjusting to the needs, the changes from the last time you did it or from the last time they did it. Changes just because we're in a pandemic right now and things have changed in terms of health and safety and the different protocols that are in place. And then on site, you know, that we don't have in-person audiences as much. That's changing. Things are opening back up, but with that brings a lot of changes and an increased emphasis on the online component of events that are hybrid events, right? That have in-person attendance as well as the online. Now that there's no one in person, right, or there hasn't been for a while and it's only starting to reopen, there's a renewed emphasis on that online component being that much more important, and trying to throw out all of those features and engagement items that were once limited to the in-person audience. Now everyone online needs to take part in these things previously that they didn't. So it is kind of an interesting dynamic there with the fluidity. We also do a lot of things where it's on location, right? And the location changes all the time. And so you arrive for your site visit, and you know, sometimes things change between now and then. Places, you know, my favorite back in the day was when a hotel did an upgrade and they removed the Ethernet ports. And to me, that was really funny because they upgraded their Wi-Fi, they removed the Ethernet. We don't see that as much, but yesterday I had once where I plugged into the Ethernet and that one wasn't working. The one 100 feet away was, because that was an upgrade. So you need to be fluid, and you know, the 100 and the 200 foot Ethernet cable, you know, that's packed in extra when you were told you're going to get an Ethernet feed directly to your tech table. You know, that's kind of par for the norm nowadays. For me, optimization really is around your signal flow being as pure as it can for what you're delivering. So there's no sense starting interlaced and changing it to progressive and then upscaling, then downscaling and going interlaced again, progressive, and then cropping it and then stretching it. You know, the really silly things that we used to do back in the HDV world that hopefully are gone now. So you kind of have in mind what your end production and recording is going to be, and everything along that line, that pipe, that workflow is as consistent as possible. So those are kind of my takes on those two terms there. let's go back around the room here again, and let's talk a little bit about strategy in terms of making choices, in terms of what your average workflow might be, or on the most recent job you produced, and what are some of the choices you might have made in terms of equipment to provide. I mean, I know a lot of this comes in when you're doing your pre-production planning and you're providing quotations. You decide what equipment you use on which job. If you have 6 different types of cameras and like me, multiples of everything, how do you decide what to use and where? So let's start with you. Let's actually go to Corey here. Let's switch up the order.
I mean, I start with budget. Everything starts and ends with budget, right? It's like, well, I'm not going to sell somebody SRT full high quality workflows with remote stations sent to all the clients if they don't have the money for it. Also, your talent, that's a huge thing. For us, what we found in the remote workflows is keep it simple, stupid. 100% applies. If the client is if the client wants something where they can talk like we're talking right now, what I like to call an elevated Zoom webinar, where you have graphics, lower thirds, it looks like television, except for the remote people are coming in WebRTC. We'll do what's called a Zoom, what I call a Zoom garden approach to life, which is, have everybody come in on Zoom. We pull them out with either NDI or whatever we need to, Dante audio, get them into some kind of switcher and make a show out of it. And that's kind of like baseline, because a lot of people just want to talk to each other. So I guess it comes down to format. When we're doing a sports show and it's just 2 people talking, we'll do more of, we might throw in SRT and use our Rivet application to send SRT, because we know we can get a really high quality remote signal out of that. So, what's funny about remote, as most of us know in the industry, is that the better the quality, the more problems that you have, either with talent, with IP, with the kind of producers that you need, with how you have to do the setups. It becomes more complicated the higher quality you want in a virtual and a remote environment. But yeah, I think for us, everything starts with budget. If you don't have the budget, there's no reason for us to push some of the higher end, more innovative solutions out there.
Okay, thanks, Corey. Jeff.
In our work in live sports, we don't have to worry about the budget as much, because we're working on a contract mostly for the tour that we're managing, which is professional tennis. So for us in those events, we have specific kits, and I definitely subscribe to same cameras everywhere. Never mix match manufacturers, and I try to stay with the same exact camera everywhere, just because that just makes things easier. You don't have to fight a lot of things. How the guys are doing it, like in the NFL and a couple of the others, you've noticed where they have that full frame that they're throwing in, and it's just such a big jump for those of us that are in the business. Some people out there are going like, "Oh, look how cool! The depth of field is different," or they don't know that. It's just like, it just looks different. They like it for whatever reason. I'm not one that subscribes to that. So I would rather have consistency in the same look across the board. So we use the same cameras everywhere. And that also makes it easier to troubleshoot. Like Corey was saying, it's like the more elaborate your productions get and the higher quality you're shooting for, then the more challenges you're going to have in maintaining that quality all the way through too.
Okay, let's go there for a moment there, and I'll come to you, Robert, in a minute. So you guys produce a lot of tennis, and now is it Panasonic, the box cameras that you're still utilizing, or
yes,
have you upgraded? Okay, and
yeah,
how was
Panasonic,
that selection process made?
Well, the UB300s were originally purchased 4 years ago now. It's a 1-inch CMOS sensor. It is designed it's a box camera. So it's designed to have a B4 lens added to it, which was the second requisite that we needed. 4K output was a big part of that. We're right off the bat. We had to be 4K for this contract. And then the other part is we put these on robotic heads. And so all our camera operators are either in the truck or fully remoted. And so that is something very unusual and very different that we do. And in our quote, as they call them, REMI setups. But that is something that we do and we've done very well with. And so our camera robotics are operated. And that was a reason for going with those cameras. And so it's just a matter of which lens do you want to, that's the only choices now. So we have, but most of our lenses are the same lenses, even for that matter. They're all Fuji 9, but they're There's a couple of different sizes that we have depending on if we need a little bit longer reach. And we do put those cameras sometimes on big box lenses if we need to, like some of the larger sporting events that we do, like the ATP 250s and 500s, they require that as a prerequisite. So we'll use the same cameras on different lenses, just like any other TV truck would do. And then that gives us that capability to have consistency still all the way around, whether it's somebody behind the camera, behind a big box lens, and have the zoom controls and everything like a normal studio type setup, or if they're sitting in the truck running the PTZ type to cameras. So we do use some PTZs now, a little bit more as the Panasonic UE150. It is practically the same camera.
That's the best camera. I'm
Guts.
just going to tell you that right now. That's one of the best
for
cameras.
PTZs.
Yeah,
hands down. Yeah, it is without a doubt one of the best PTZs on the market, and its guts are pretty much the same as our UB300. So they really go together really well. We use them for like B shots and C shots, but they're definitely what I would consider the top of the market without a doubt.
Well, and then it's kind of neat too, right? That going back even 4 years, that you started distancing before that was really a requirement, and you had a lot of advanced training in that, right? So once everything became remote production, it wasn't like it was a massive change for you and your operators, right? To all of a sudden get behind the joystick and have to do the PTZ control if they were used to physically, being on the tripod there and in person. I'm sure there's also environmental factors that come in there as well, right? I mean, those are long days, and some of those locations can be quite warm and in the sun.
And that was a big part. At first, people always think it's like, oh, remote production, you're saving all this money and travel, you're saving lodging, you're saving. It is a part of it, but a big part of us making this transition was about giving a higher quality of life to our employees and to our contractors that we have, because they don't have to cook on a tennis court that's like 120. I'm not exaggerating. We actually measured it one day because it was so hot in Lexington. It was 135 on the court. So whenever you're out there cooking like that, yeah, you get used to it, but nobody wants to be used to it. It's a lot better and you could work a lot better and also longer hours if that was necessary whenever you're in a nice AC truck or if you're sitting at home on your couch. All
right. There's been a request to repeat that model number of the PTZ. So that's the Panasonic
UE150.
UE150. All right. Rob, strategy, selecting cameras. I mean, you're a FS5 user. Some of your clients use a Panasonic Super 35 camera. What goes through your mind when you're selecting equipment? I mean, you even have different web encoders that are hardware based versus your switchers.
Yeah, and just to emphasize Corey and Jeff's point with budget, I mean, that's always a starting point. And also for me, just what the business requirements are. That's something that, whether I'm doing software development for streaming or live production, understanding all the business requirements. And to Jeff's point, the by the ways, my checklist keeps growing and growing with each event as I get into, any new unventured territory. So, I was joking with my partner about this, just how, you sort of just have to be ready to ask all these questions that may seem, very matter of fact and common sense to all of us, but to someone who I made a joke. I do a lot of volunteer streaming, and where I just charge rental for my gear here specifically on Salt Spring Island. Like I won't, if there's travel expenses, but there's a lot of nonprofits that have been hurting with COVID, and here on Salt Spring, the Salt Spring National Art Prize just happened, which is a pretty prestigious art event now in Canada, and it was their first time live streaming, and I kept running the joke during pre-production that it's like first contact with Star Trek, right? Like a lot of people think live streaming is just this awesome thing that's just going to generate lots of new viewers that they hadn't had before. And I know from experience with a lot of the government and nonprofit work that I've done on a paid level too, that if your social media coordination, if your marketing and advertising isn't there, again, I'm sort of going into business requirements, but it's the kind of thing that I'm finding I need a social media coordinator at times with small to medium size events because they don't have people that are familiar with live streaming, right? And they may not even know social media that well, even though they're the social media coordinator, right? They're in government or they're in an NGO where they don't necessarily, you know, they might have a different day job. And so, again, Corey brought this up. Education is such a big part of what we end up doing with live streaming. And just like First Contact on a Star Trek level, it's sort of baby steps. Like I think all of us have been in a situation, and maybe not Jeff with his big enterprise or Corey with bigger enterprise events, because that's not part of their business offering necessarily, is, you know, helping the client understand how to bring eyeballs. The professional events, the eyeballs are there. But when it comes to a lot of the work that I'm doing, like, you know, people will think, oh, we'll have at least 1,000 people there. And I can matter-of-factly just tell them, yeah, I think you'll probably have 100 to 150. And that's generally, you know, they'll go through all this work and they don't do their work on the marketing end of it. And I know I don't want to stray into this too deeply because it's not really the core of this panel, but it is important. You know, you don't want all of this effort that around live streaming to necessarily be something that was all for naught. I mean, luckily, we all know VOD gives life to all live streams. Maybe not as much in the sports arena as it is with other more informational events or award shows, but you know, it is one of those things that you want to keep in mind with, you know, is what your budget is going to play into that. Like, well, what are you doing to actually make this whole live stream worthwhile so that at the end of the day, you're not disappointed with the demographics that I end up giving you at the end of this, right? So
that's a really good point. I just want to say one thing on that, because it goes to the optimization. So for instance, we're doing a live stream about vMix Bootcamp next week, a little bit of pub, but you got to do the scheduled posts on LinkedIn. Not only that, do the scheduled posts on LinkedIn, do the scheduled posts on YouTube, send the newsletter, right? And then it's like, hey, Jeff, can you invite all your friends from this to the LinkedIn post, right? You got to do that. To Robert's point, like, all of this seems like, yeah, that's obvious. And so many of my clients don't do those steps where I go, here are the 10 steps. And if you just do this, you're going to at least have a core audience that already likes your content, that's going to watch your content. So 100%, I just wanted to throw that up there. Like, people think thumbnails don't matter. Thumbnails matter. Schedule posts don't matter. Like, those things are huge. They seem small, but they're actually really, really huge.
Yeah, please make this as much of a conversation as we can. Yeah, that's what this is about. Thanks, Corey.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, right? That our workflow, our job as producers, it doesn't start at the front of the lens and end in the transmission, right? It's all things, right? It's in the pre-production, the event marketing, and then the follow-up. You mentioned demographics already, right? The reporting on the analytics of the viewership, and then working with our clients on what can they learn from this production so they can apply it to the next time. And a lot of times those learnings are centered around their marketing efforts and better reach. It's almost like we're having to make sure that we're still, the return on investment that they make in us is worth it, so they can continue to produce these events with positive returns there and strong viewership. So it is neat how that ends up working. Let's talk a little bit about workflow considerations when it comes to handling. I guess, Jeff, you talked about you start with 4K because that's your camera, but then down the line, this signal gets processed and you're streaming probably not at 4K but at something else. What does that signal flow look like, and what hardware is stepping down and doing format conversion? Are you using NDI format converters? Is that all within the switcher?
Yeah, we're pretty much a TriCaster and BizVector Plus house for our switching solutions. Our encoding is actually going through LiveStream Studios, which is a requirement from our client because LiveStream Studio has some specific needs that they have specific needs that LiveStream Studio handles with, like Zixi software encoding, which is one of the things they use into their engine for distribution, final distribution. But we're 4K to the switcher. So we're going over NDI. We convert out of the camera because the camera doesn't have 4K out. None of the cameras nowadays, short of the Bird Dogs, but we don't use those. But any of the Panasonic cameras, we have to convert it out. So we use different NDI converters, kind of like Mesh Wells is kind of what we were we're landing on. We have a lot of new tech converters, of course, also. And then we convert it to NDI. Then NDI goes in our switcher. Out of our switcher is going to LiveStream Studio, which is actually doing the encoding. And so that encoding is then, it is less than 4K, but the client wants 4K until that point. And so that's what they get when they pay for it. So that's kind of our workflow. And since we have that workflow in place, it helps us to be able to stream. It's not a matter of can we do 4K? It's just a matter of turning on the right profile when we're streaming out if we want to do 4K. Then having, of course, the appropriate bandwidth and everything like that too. But that's kind of our workflow is we stay in the NDI world for the most part of it.
Okay. Corey, what about you? How's your workflow compared to that?
Oh, okay. So in our studio, we have the new K-Rose SMPTE 2110 switcher with UE150s and the TechnoPoint system. And so that's like our innovation switcher, right? Like, hey, we want to do SMPTE 2110 because we just want to spend a lot of money and it's awesome. And it is awesome and it's cool. But primarily we have a vMix workflow with Blackmagic gear. And I think we're going to go through cameras later, but I can go through our whole camera chain line. But however, we have gone to more of what I call a Restream IO workflow. Now we are not using Restream IO, we're using our virtual video control room. But so much of what we do now is we take the program, we'll encode it. We'll either use a high vision encoder, a Videon encoder, or a Clearcaster encoder, or vMix, right? One of those four things primarily. Sometimes LiveStream Studios, full disclosure, Jeff loves it when I say this, I develop a LiveStream Studio. So little shout out to a end of life product that's still getting used in today's age. I think that's awesome. And so a lot of what we're doing is we're doing distribution in the cloud. We're doing it encoding, transcoding, transmuxing in the cloud. And so what that allows us to do is have remote and encoding monitors and encoding engineers. So when you have, for New Year's, for instance, we send our program into virtual video control room into AWS, and then we send it out to Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all destinations, live stream, the original live stream, etc. And so we're going more to that workflow because SRT does allow us to have, the reliability of that. Everybody talks about SRT as a remote contribution, but one of the things I love about SRT and I've fallen in love with for the last, 3 or 4 years is its transmission over IP capabilities, specifically for distribution. So we primarily are using, a primary backup encoder, SRT to the cloud, and then out to destinations for most of our shows.
All right, let's talk a little about terms here because we're dropping a couple acronyms. I want to make sure that all of viewers are able to follow. So no,
I'm the jargon
that's
king,
fine.
dude.
You do that, and then I'll ask for these terms. So earlier on, we talked about REMI. Jeff did that. Corey, you mentioned SMPTE ST2110. So Jeff, just define REMI for us, and then Corey, SMPTE 2110.
REMI was coined by mostly ESPN. As their workflows where they were bringing multiple sources from a location. At that time, most of it was not IP. When they first started doing REMI production, it was actually multipath over satellite. And can you only imagine the nightmares and timing and things like that? It got better with IP. Now we use it on a daily basis all the time. And a lot of us do. We're doing it. And basically it's bringing all those feeds to a central control room, whether it's an on-the-ground control room or a virtual control room like Corey's doing in the cloud. It's what I'm doing in the cloud. I'm running everything in the cloud too. I use a different set of tools than Corey, and some of the same. I still have SRT bouncing around. I use LiveView. I use, as far as ingesting and things like that, going into the cloud. So the REMI is basically remote operations. They have a new acronym out now too that they quote coined, and it's like REMCO or something like that. I've got to go back and look.
I like REMCR. I like REMCR because like you have a master control room. So like REMI,
remote control
it's like
room.
remote control room. I think is really what the REMI was wanting to be.
Yeah. But that's REMI is remote control. Yeah.
it's funny because we're building a new remote master control and broadcast center in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So trying to train Chicago and Milwaukee architects and contractors, what they all ask that question: what's a REMI? What is this REMI here on the layout? It's great. But SMPTE 2110 was, okay, I'm going to nerd out here. Actually, it was released in 2017, people. 2017 is 2021. It's 2017. And in 2017, this idiot right here thought that NAB in April was going to have SMPTE 2110 cameras. So what SMPTE 2110 does is in a long story short, does two really huge things. One, it gets precision time protocol, which is actually 2052, I think is the standard, which is the first time since like 1957 or something we changed time code protocol, which is like incredible. The time code we've all been using is like 60, 70 years old that we're using right now. It's awesome. But by having precision time protocol and adding the new standard SMPTE 2110, we're able to have uncompressed video over IP. So you might say, hey, why is that different than NDI? So what NewTek did brilliantly, by the way, is they came out with an IP standard of their own. The only thing, and they're actually adopting very fast, that they didn't add was QoS, quality of service, and quality control, which SMPTE, by adding the PTP standard, added. So the thought was everybody would move to IP using SMPTE 2110. Now, I've talked to many software developers who are like, SMPTE 2110, I would never do that. And so, I'm an idiot and I like to do things that are like, I think are going to be the standard. And SMPTE has been the standard, since we've all been, before we were all born, SMPTE was the way forward. The Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers created these standards, and SMPTE 2110 is pretty awesome. What it does is it allows you to put everything on an IP network. So it's right now, ours is on a 100 gig switch. Yes, 100 gig switch, 100 gig Mellanox switch. And so we have to convert our SDI or NDI and our SRT into the SMPTE 2110 uncompressed standard. Now, what that does is it does the things that you love about NDI and SRT. You can duplicate and replicate and mirror your streams. So now if I put a stream here, I don't need a DA. I don't need a multi-viewer. I can get that stream and send it anywhere that I want. So it has all the features of NDI. It's just an uncompressed format. Now, it's very, very expensive, and I don't recommend anybody go down that path unless you have a broadcast facility that demands it. But it's really freaking cool, and I don't think it's dead. I think we're slowly moving SDI away from there. I think you're going to be in a world where you have NDI, SRT, and SMPTE 2110 living and existing peacefully together.
A fascinating take on the, I guess, future of IP workflows there. Robert, what's your take on working within these formats, as well as the traditional SDI and HDMI and wireless video transmission?
Well, I don't want to bring up my years doing Flash work and writing Flash books, but most of my workflow still is RTMP. So, when I'm pushing out to whether it's custom builds of Wowza or whatever, infrastructure I'm using on the cloud, it's usually an RTMP push. Now, the only problem with RTMP, of course, is it's limited to H.264 and AAC codecs. So if the exceptions I make with that is if I'm ever doing remote, if I'm ever on site or working with contributions that have very, might have, less than stellar bandwidth, SRT and HEVC over SRT can be a lifesaver, specifically from a quality point of view, of course. So that's the only time I've had to delve into it. And Corey already mentioned Videon products. I'm a big fan of Videon. They've got a great team that heads that up out of Pennsylvania, and I really like their products. They've stayed on top of all of the new protocols and new capabilities, and as well as doing some fun things with RTMP is on top of that. So for me, and I know we were talking about switchers and tech like that. For me, I'm a big Roland fan. My good old standby has always been the V60 HD. I recently reviewed and during that Salt Spring National Art Prize got to test the V160 HD. And if I have an increase in live events in this year and in the new year, I would certainly upgrade to the 160. But I'm a big fan of hardware controls. Of course, if everything's cloud-based, you can't bring your Rolands to the cloud. I mean, not as hardware. It's all going to be some kind of software interface. And so, I typically use vMix on the cloud for any of the work that I'm doing where everything's being controlled in the cloud. Big fan of vMix. I don't know when I guess I missed the newsletter when they finally moved to a subscription license, but I was a big fan of that. Like, that was really neat that they started to offer subscription licensing so that, I don't use it as my standby. So to just be able to use it on a spot basis is really neat without having to pay an entire license for several computers if I need it across several computers. So, that's the way most software is moving, and it's going to be catch up for those that aren't doing subscription-based models. But in a nutshell, that's basically where, when it comes to switching, where my emphasis is on.
All right, thank you, Rob. I know myself, we've been, as a V60 HD user as well, from Roland for many years, that was my go-to. I'm finding more now that we're entering 4K workflows. It's not necessarily that's what we're delivering in for the live stream, but we are sometimes recording and mastering in that. And then to add the extra wrinkle of complexity, some of the productions are requiring footage that's in a log format that's going to be graded after the fact. And so that kind of a workflow is something that we as recently as I think a week or two ago, we were working on with Ballet BC, that's Ballet British Columbia. And it was a really neat workflow. We were using Sony Z280s. So it's a 4K video camera with 12G HD SDI output. And we were bringing that into Atomos products. I think the Infernal was one of them. And applying a lookup table and then outputting a Rec 709 broadcast signal to the video switcher that was being webcast out, but still preserving that log footage in camera and on external recorders so that their video team could recut all the footage, completely ignore all the work that I've done, just take the ISOs and do a proper grading job. And one of the things I actually was very impressed with was how well of a job those Atomos recorders did at applying, a real-time lookup table on there and footage that looked great, right? It definitely had workflow considerations because everything had to go into the video switcher. And in this case, we were using the Blackmagic Design Television Studio Pro 4K. So the multi-view monitor, we actually had to apply a lookup table on that output and then split that so the artistic director and the choreographer had their own multi-view monitor, and myself, of course. And then the program output then needed to have a lookup table applied to it for the stream. So, a lot of different workflow considerations. And the one thing that actually entered into the conversation a lot, and there was a big challenge, was there doesn't seem to be many 4K converters, format converters. So 4K to HDMI, something I thought that might be fairly straightforward, and there'd be multiple solutions. There weren't as many as I thought there would be. I mean, there are some, right? I think Decimator does have one, and Blackmagic Design has their Terran X ones.
AJA has one.
Oh, they do as well. Okay, so
yeah.
It seems like everyone does have one, but in this day and age, my local video suppliers in town, no stock of anything. And if I want to buy 3 of them, guess how many weeks that's going to be, right? What's your guys' experience been with working within those formats? And have you ever had to do log footage and real-time down conversion like that with some challenges?
Yeah, we've done that exact workflow. It's funny, you guys are bringing up all my cameras. So we have the Z280s. We've done that workflow with the Z280s. Okay, I totally got screwed. I totally felt screwed over by Sony because I was a huge what the PMW 300s were, the old PMW 300s, which were the first cameras that before the PMW 300s. I can't remember their name right now, and I can't believe it, but it's the first over the EX3s. So the EX3 was like that first camera, right, where you could put a 2/3 lens on a little 3-chip camera, and MTV started using them. I'm really aging myself here, people. So then they came out with the PMW 300, right? And you could still do the same thing. You could put a 2/3 lens on there if you got the E mount. So you were like, oh man, $7,000 camera, and I got this awesome lens on here. Then they came out the Z280s, and I was like, oh man, 12 GSDI out. Woohoo! And you can't change the lens, Sony, you're killing me. Like, you have the fixed lens on there. So we have the Z280s, but I was going to say with that workflow, Shawn, we've done that exact workflow with Ursa broadcast cameras on the 2/3. You have to record into the SSD. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but then you can come out the 12 GSDI signal, go into the switcher just like you did, apply the LUT tables. You can either apply the LUT tables on the cameras themselves and then put them out, or you can use the CCUs that the Blackmagic has. We kind of have done both ways. There's some limitation on 4K 60 or something that you have to do to apply the LUT tables. But when we have to do what your workflow, my preferred path is the Ursa Mini Pros or the Ursa broadcasts.
Excellent. Thank you for the feedback. When it comes to video capture cards and hardware encoders, I think a lot of it really depends on what your workflow is, right? Solutions like TriCaster, when we're coming to talking about SDI and HDMI and not the new tech, not the NDI inputs there, but the traditional copper inputs there. New tech, you don't, that it has those physical plugins there, but other software like vMix, and when you're working with hardware switchers, you need to have hardware. So what are some of the hardware solutions that you guys like for video capture cards and live streaming encoders and recorders?
I want to touch on one thing that hasn't been said yet. HDMI. HDMI is the best connector you could ever use to plug into a TV. And that's the only time it should ever be used. Ever be used. It should not be used in live production.
You're yelling at the cloud. You're an old man yelling at the cloud. You realize this, right?
There's too much writing on your production to use an HDMI that could fall out, that pulls out. Yeah, there's 2 locking connectors out there, I know, but nobody could really use them. That's my feelings, and I'm strong about that. So anybody out there that's getting into this business and getting into the live streaming, don't use the HDMI. Convert it as fast as possible. Never touch that connection again if you can. If your cameras that you're limited to using specific cameras that only do HDMI, invest in a different camera if you can. But I agree with Victoria. Having that 12G capability is amazing. I actually have one Sony Z280, and that was the reason I bought it for also. And same reason has the same lens issues or limitations that we found, and so it doesn't get used. But that Sony is definitely a powerhouse for those that are in that world and need that. Like you're saying, Shawn, that LUTs and other capabilities. Our thing is get it from HDSDI or 12G SDI directly into a converter as soon as possible, hit the IP network, and then from that point, it doesn't matter because we can patch it from to multiple places and from multiple places at that point. So for us, IP, whether that's on the ground, on-prem, or in the cloud, either way, get it to IP as fast as possible.
That sounds just so simple and efficient, and I guess that's because it is, right? It just works. To your point about the HDMI, it's definitely a valid point, but there's a whole generation, and specifically Sony cameras, that they're 4K cameras with 4K HDMI outputs, and the SDI is 3G HDSDI, right? Limited to 1920 by 1080 at 60p, and that's where they max out. So if you need 4K out, you've got to get that HDMI out, and it's kind of sad. And if even the HDSDI is, the color space is even more restricted than the HDMI. It's not 422, it's 420. And I'm not sure what Sony was doing for quite a while, but they seem to ignore that whole 12G HDSDI standard. And other than the the Z280. I have to think about that and convert it from Z to Z every time for you guys. But the Z280s, and then now there's a few new ones coming on, right? I think the FX7, FX6, and FX9 might support that, but FS5 and 5 Mark II and cameras like those,
I think everybody was
they're
looking
lacking.
to what was going to be the future, and so that it really stagnated, really bad for us in the production where there really wasn't a lot of move to 12G. Number one, you can't just use any other, unfortunately, and most people don't know this either, is you can't just use any BNC or SDI cable as 12G. They're not all the same. They're not all made the same. They look the same. They're not made the same. So you need to use 12G rated cable in your infrastructure, in your whole plant, in order to be able to move that much bandwidth. And your distances are also going to be affected too. You can't just throw down a 300-foot cable that we're used to doing. That's my long cables, is 300 foot. And so that's just a given. I can't use 12G over that. So I have to convert it. Now, once I hit my IP side, I literally can go miles because I'm on fiber at that point. My IP is all based off of, my whole infrastructure is based off of IP over fiber. So that's one of our reasons for getting it all to IP as fast as possible. But because everybody in the manufacturer space was looking out there as all the different options of what people wanted, there wasn't a demand for 12G because it was a major investment to get to that 12G capability. And then also, we were having this bridge. We're still at it of manufacturers like, do we support the hardware inputs or do we just support IP-based inputs? And that's a big, I guess you call it a big bridge that we need to get across.
Well, and they're not going to, the what Jeff just said is 100% on point. And I'm going to tell you right now, Sony and Panasonic are not going to support an NDI as an output because it's not a standard. It's an idea. It's a thing that works, but
both manufacturers are now output. They both have cameras that are doing it
now. But
when
you were
first,
like
it was
2017.
It was a year or two before they come on.
Like, look at the timeline, right? It's like 2017, SMPTE 2110 comes out, right? We think we're going to get a camera with SMPTE 2110 in 2 years, and pretty much we're right on the flip side of the pandemic. So it's like no one during the pandemic wants a SMPTE 2110 camera is ready to invest in it. You are seeing on the high end, Sony has an amazing camera that has SMPTE 2110 outputs that we're going to be using for New Year's Eve in Times Square. They're sick. They're basically the graduate version of what broadcasters use. The main Sony camera, the HDC 1500, which was what I grew up on, that turned into the HDC 4300, which had 12 GSDI outputs, which now I don't know what the SMPTE 2110 name is, but on the high end, you are seeing SMPTE 2110 adoption. It just hasn't reached us really yet.
I'm surprised, though, that there hasn't been more NDI within cameras. I mean, Panasonic did launch, there was the AG CX350, and unfortunately that NDI camera had the NDI HX protocol in it and not the full one there, so I think that got poo-pooed a little bit. And that did seem like a very solid camera at the time and a great bang for your buck, but I don't know if that camera really caught on as much as they hoped it would. And then since then, other than PTZ cameras, there really haven't been many that have come out with baked in NDI. But when you look on online forums, and I mean, even on the Z280, there was just some chatter on a Facebook group I'm part of, and someone's saying, here's my wish list on a 3-year-old camera, as if there's anything new going to come out. But the wish list was, there's an Ethernet port. We'd love to see NDI come out of that, and I would as well. But that's not going to happen. All right, we've only got a few minutes, so let me throw a few questions at you that have come in on this chat here, and just feel free to chime in here. So, question is, looking at moving even higher bandwidth video across public internet and even on towards cloud produced, what do you see as the tech that could take things there? NDI5, ST2010, inside cloud metal, CDI, Sienna, or something completely unexpected, etc.?
I could definitely say without a doubt right now, NDI is king in the cloud because it's simple and easy to implement within your cloud infrastructure. Now, to move it across the cloud, that brings a little bit more. Now, you could definitely do it with transit gateways, and you could bounce from data center to data center across between different AWS data centers. But the problem is you're going to pay for some serious amount of bandwidth to do that. There is CDI, and that's what Amazon came out. Again, bandwidth is going to be huge because it is basically a SIP 2110 signal in the cloud. It's uncompressed. And so you're moving a lot of data. They're going to charge you for it. Eventually, it'll catch up. Sienna is supporting both. I'm a big Sienna user and proponent. They are supporting both NDI and have been forever, but also supporting CDI in the AWS workflows. So that would be a way of doing that if you needed to do really high bandwidth and you're looking for no compression whatsoever.
Okay. Another question is, what streaming protocol do you suggest for low 3 megabit per second or less bandwidth connections to allow for 720 30p? Crickets here. All right. What streaming protocol? I'm not really sure. I mean, H.26 or MP4.
You could, well, here's the thing. At 3 megs H.264 RTMP, 720p, you're okay. I mean, you know, you're fine. Now, I'm going to piggyback on what Jeff said because I 100% agree with it. Just to talk about that, I think they can both kind of be together. SRT HEVC at 3 megs. Oh, man, you looking at some beauty. Here's the thing about SRT, right? SRT 6 megs H.264, not even H.265. SRT 6 megs H.264 off a Makito encoder or our encoder rivet plug there. You could do 6 to 15 megs, looks like television. It's insanity how good it looks. And here's the crazy thing, and no one on this panel is going to believe me, but I actually did it. Last year for New Year's Eve in Times Square, we sent 20 feeds with Makitos up to the cloud. SRT, so H feed was 6 megs. So full SDI to SRT encode to the cloud. We then decoded them with Makito decoder. So we decoded 6 megs, turned it back into 1.45 gigabit SDI, cut a show, and then encoded it with a Makito 6 megs. And I literally have one monitor on the right that's SDI, and I have one monitor on the left that what is going to YouTube before it gets encoded. And I'm telling you right now, there was no macro blocking. You could not tell the difference. And I took that thing apart, put it back together, took it apart again. And it's crazy. So there's definitely something to that. So to me, the best cloud workflow, to Jeff's point, is SRT is your transport protocol that gets you into the cloud, and NDI inside of a VPC. Jeff and I were actually talking about this last week. The ability to take something like Viz Vector or LiveView or Sienna NDI or our virtual video control room, right? And you're in your own VPC in AWS that you own, that's yours. And the ability to see all of those feeds in your VPC and do things with them is incredible. And, you know, Jeff has probably been doing this longer than anybody in, as far as like that using Sienna. But it is incredible. Like, to me, NDI on-prem is not as sexy as NDI in the cloud. NDI in the cloud is like a shiny ball. It's so sexy, and there's so many things you can do with it.
All right. Thank you, Corey. At this point, I'm going to have to wrap this panel. We are running out of time here. We've dropped a lot of really great acronyms. We've talked about fluid workflows and efficiency. We've spent most of the time up in the cloud, and every now and again we came back down and hooked up to copper there. So Robert, thank you. Jeff, thank you. Corey, thank you. And back to you, Eric.
You bet. We have one quick question in the chat. I'll allow it, even though it's in the chat. Jeff, what camera are you using right now? Someone's wondering. Huddle cam, right?
This one? Yeah. This is a Conftel, which is the same thing as the Huddle Cam, Conftel, Konftel. I believe it's the OEM for the Huddle Cam.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to our sponsors, Conviva, Limelight Networks, Signient. It's getting to the end of the day. And Video Guys, where you can buy some of this stuff that we've been talking about. The winner of the Amazon gift card. I better choose that right now. I better roll that attendee list and land on Dave Bursky. Dave Bursky.
You got to thank Limelight as well, don't you?
Did I not say Limelight? Limelight.
No, but we're saying it now. Limelight.
That's right. Okay. you know what? Let's just roll the thank you vid. Let's just roll the sponsor video and make sure we get them all in. We'll see you in 30 minutes for our last innovation series of Streaming Media West Connect with Teradek, Main Concept, and Vision Euler. See you then.
Videoguys.com is your source for PTZ cameras that fit productions of all sizes.
Add multiple camera angles to your production without adding operator. Perfect for houses of worship, corporate AV, education, and more. Video Guys offers cameras from PTZ Optics, Bird Dog, Panasonic, and NewTek. Control these cameras using an IR remote, control app, or hardware controller with serial or network connection.
Go to videoguys.com or call us at 800-323-2325 for help finding the camera that's right for you.
In this era of streaming video, we are pioneers, helping make your stories more vibrant. Conviva lives in billions of apps on devices all over the world, measuring trillions of data points each day to provide real-time insights for your content, ads, and social. Conviva. Every stream, every screen, every second.